probably remember the Minerva case. Minerva was a commentator who was just posting economic posts, and the prosecution went after him, and the financial regulatory authorities went after him, and he ended up in court.
That's coming up in just a moment. From Asia News Weekly, you're listening to Asia Now, a collection of stories and interviews from the Asia-Pacific region. Most look upon the freedom of the press as a hallmark of democracy. Japan's Tatsuya Kato has been indicted for defaming South Korean President Park Geun-hye. Was it justified or an attempt to intimidate the Fourth Estate? It's one conversation taking place in Asia now. Welcome to the podcast, everyone. I'm your host, Steve Miller, and I'd like to thank you for listening and downloading this week's episode. In an age where governments around the world are employing various methods to keep tabs on their citizens in the name of, quote, national security, it's never been more important to have an empowered Fourth Estate, or simply the press. The ability to ask the hard questions and present relative information is key to keeping the public informed and to hold government officials accountable for their actions. Many look to the United States as the litmus test for a free press. While that may have been the case at one time, it's not necessarily the truth anymore. According to Reporters Without Borders, the United States is ranked 46 out of 180 countries on their index of press freedom, down 14 spots from the previous year. It's an important ranking because our discussion today surrounds South Korea and Japan. Their rankings on the same scale are 57 and 59 respectively. Both nations also saw a dip in their standings from the previous year as well. So, comparatively speaking, at least on paper, the amount of press freedom between these countries doesn't appear to be all that too different. But the specific laws, and more importantly their enforcement, make all the difference. Which brings us to today's topic. April 16th is a date that everyone in South Korea does remember. In the early morning hours, the Sewol ferry ran aground, causing it to capsize and sink. It was overloaded, poorly commanded, and even the rescue was botched. Ultimately, over 300 souls were lost that day, and unfortunately, most of them were children. And even today, the nation still writhes in pain. Many questions regarding why the nation's response was so poor were asked. What was President Park Geun-hye doing during the critical window when those high school kids could have been saved? The question was asked in Parliament, and again in a Chosun Ilbo column on July 18th. Looking into the issue, the Chosun Ilbo uncovered what it called were rumors unworthy of spreading that may have actually accounted for the president's whereabouts during a 7-hour window opposition lawmakers were questioning. Tatsuya Kato, former Seoul bureau chief for the very conservative Japanese Sankei Shimbun, took up the quest to look into these rumors. What were they, and why didn't the Chosun Ilbo feel they were worth mentioning? Tracking down gossip-filled newsletters from Seoul's financial district, Kato was able to uncover the rumor the Chosun Ilbo cited, and included it in his August 3rd online-only report. The specific rumor was that President Park Geun-hye was involved romantically at the time of the Sewol sinking. The president lashed out, saying Kato's article was a deliberate attempt to undermine her position. An investigation into Kato ensued, and on October 8th, he was indicted for defaming the president. Quote, "It is completely normal for news media to ask questions about the actions of politicians, including the president. Vagueness about the president's agenda during a national tragedy is clearly a subject of public interest. Furthermore, Kato's story was based on information which was already online and which has not been the subject of any complaint. Media freedom is not just a privilege for journalists, but also the public's right. And this story concerned a matter of public interest. Regardless of its editorial line and its politics, Sankei Shimbun had a right to raise questions about South Korea's government and president, and to mention what seemed to have been rumors, said Benjamin Ishmael, the head of the Reporters Without Borders Asia desk. Furthermore, Japanese Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshihide Suga said, quote, "It is extremely deplorable that the Sankei Shimbun's former Seoul bureau chief was indicted. in a move by South Korea which ignores voices of concern repeatedly expressed by our government and by media inside and outside Japan." End quote. Every nation is unique and has their own set of laws governing libel and defamation. To help put this story into context, Andrew Salmon, Seoul-based reporter, author of Modern Korea, All That Matters, and Korea Times columnist, explains South Korea's defamation law.
That's not easy because I'm not a lawyer, but my understanding is that libel or defamation in Korea is a particularly strong law. And it doesn't matter the truth or otherwise of a contention. If someone defames another person and that person can prove that he has been damaged, the factual accuracy of the original report is irrelevant. That essentially means that a reporter or a media or a newspaper or whatever can actually report something which may well be in the public interest, and it may well be true and can still be successfully sued for defamation. And that's trouble.
One might imagine that if the release of factually true information can lead to charges of defamation, how can news organizations carry out investigative journalism?
News organizations do, of course, have legal teams and they have law firms on call, and certainly there's due process here. So yeah, they do have some legal protection in the sense that there is a court system. That having been said, my understanding is that it's a pretty strong law here, and so it can be problematic. That having been said, I couldn't think of too many cases where these kind of things have happened. I don't think anyone's suggesting that South Korea is going back to the days of authoritarian dictatorship in this case. But it seems to be pretty isolated, and I think it may be rather specific to the media in question, because I don't think the Sankei is particularly popular with the Blue House. But of course, that's not the point. The point is the overall principle of press freedom.
But even with lawyers at their disposal, news organizations don't have an impenetrable shield.
This seems to be an isolated case. I hope it doesn't signal a trend. If it did, it would be enormously troubling. But there have been a few cases over the last 10, 15 years, which I think do trouble people. One was a securities analyst, Jonathan Dutton, who wrote a report downgrading Samsung Electronics. He was working for UBS at the time. Samsung was furious about this, made very, very clear its fury, and suddenly UBS found itself under a massive regulatory probe, and Dutton himself left the country. He was that worried about things. But more damagingly, the result of that, the fallout, was that the investment banks here, which used to be very good sources of information on the economy, basically climbed up, and it became much more difficult to either receive their analytical reports or even to speak to analysts in their research departments. And those guys used to be an excellent source of information on the Korean economy. Due to that one case, that source dried up completely, and that damage continues to this day. So these things can have repercussions. And then, of course, you probably remember the Minerva case. Minerva was a commentator who was just posting economic posts, and the prosecution went after him, and the financial regulatory authorities went after him, and he ended up in court. I think that was a massive indication that free speech in Korea is not entirely free. Now we have this issue. And of course, the background to all this is that sadly Korea's press freedom rankings, as per the International House International report, have been falling in recent years. It's no longer considered free here. It's considered partly free. I also think the Blue House may have shot itself in the foot, because generally, if a report appears in a newspaper, the first thing you do is you contact the newspaper editor and demand a retraction and or an apology. And I think if the newspaper is wrong, it will do that. Now, I don't know if the PR people in the Blue House did it. My sense is perhaps not. Perhaps they went directly to the prosecution. And that worries me, because that's a pretty authoritarian instinct.
When we take a look at this situation, we need to take a look at what exactly happened. We need to ask the question, was Kato's line of questioning relevant or serving something to enhance the public good? As I mentioned before, each country is governed by its own unique set of laws. However, I can't shake the notion that this case is anything other than an attempt to silence a reporter, especially since no action was taken against the Chosun Ilbo, and throughout the entire investigation and indictment, various news organizations, including Yonhap News, have reprinted the rumor since. Even the Korea Herald picked up on this and wrote the following, Quote, the indictment of a Japanese reporter Wednesday on a criminal defamation charge over a story on President Park Geun-hye's whereabouts on April 16th, the day of the Sewol ferry disaster, has become an international embarrassment for Korea. Kato was wrong to file a story without checking the facts, relying instead on rumors. It was sloppy journalism. Nevertheless, the prosecutor's decision to indict Kato seems excessive. End quote. And I couldn't agree more with that line of thinking. Basing a report solely on a rumor was irresponsible for Kato. But that subject was germane to a line of questioning that was previously opened during Parliament. The decision to prosecute Kato makes Park's office look petty, anti-press freedom, and anti-Japanese, since no action was taken against Korean news organizations. According to a source for the Japanese Yomiuri Shimbun, the decision, quote, whether to indict the case is already out of the prosecutor's hands, as it is a political matter, indicating that the decision would essentially be made by the Blue House, end quote. So I need to ask you, where do you fall in on this issue? Is it a case of defamation, or is it a case of politicians trying to silence the press? Be sure to leave your thoughts in the comments on Facebook or Twitter. If you haven't found us on social media, head on over to facebook.com/AsiaNewsWeekly or tweet us at AsiaNewsWeekly on Twitter. You can also send an email to the show with your questions, your comments, or your feedback. Just drop a line to podcast@AsiaNewsWeekly.net. Don't forget you can also play and download all of our episodes from our website, AsiaNewsWeekly.net. But if you prefer the show in podcast form, look for us on iTunes, Stitcher, and TuneIn Radio. And if you really enjoyed this episode and want to keep the conversation going, please share it with your friends and subscribe so you won't miss the next episode. I'd like to thank you again for listening to this week's episode. Just one piece of information. Next week, I'll be taking a small vacation. Asia Now will return on October 29th. And until then, I'm Steve Miller. Asia Now is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution 4.0 International License.